We're going to ask you to climb in here. Yeah, excellent. Excellent. So, Hermann and Heiner, you both really are pioneers, as I just said, when it comes to mobility and transport. And the name of the session was History is a Reverse Prophet. So perhaps we could also say that you two are prophets in this field. And I want to ask you, first of all, about what you're sitting in. So, Hermann, you can explain this to us. What is a Gehzeug?
Well, a Gehzeug is a representation of all the priorities and privileges which car drivers have on space and other things. This is a baby.
Smart.
A baby Gehzeug. That's why I didn't fit inside.
No, smart is a little bit smaller. We have some types. This invention happened when we had recognized that everything what I have learned and why I became a professor was a criminal activity. Because traditional transport planning is not based on science, it is based on assumptions, extrapolations of beliefs and something like that. And it was very successful, and so we are on the way to destroy the world, change the climate, and we have shifted mobility totally. Because at this time when I had this idea to how to disseminate the complex situation which is behind our behavior and the artificial environment we are producing with the cars and with other things. We had already recognized that we used the wrong unit in planning, because I think Heiner will support me in this way, because we use as unit of planning the car. Person-car unit is the unit of planning, which is idiotic.
Yeah. Because
this is only the package of stupid people. And at this time, we already recognized we have two kinds of mobility. We have the mental mobility, or we have the physical mobility. And because mental mobility is very expensive, because our brain eats up a lot of energy, of body energy, but physical mobility is the wonderful things which can be replaced by a huge amount of energy and other things. So if somebody is stupid, he needs a lot of physical energy. To move. We know it in German. In German, we have a saying which tells if what you don't have in the brain, you must have it in the legs. And if you have 200,
well, does it?
and if you have 200 horsepower in the leg, nothing is necessary anymore in the brain. And we have seen wonderful presentations about this issue today. Every time when we are talking about cars, because the car is not only outside, it is also inside of the brain. I have some slides later on, maybe.
Okay, well, but first of all, just so people get an impression here, I mean, the Gehzeug, remind us what year this was that you were actually bringing this out and showing people how much space cars take up.
Yeah, the reason was I came to this idea. I'm not at this time I had a car. Today I have no car since 20 years. Okay. But at this time I had a car, and normally I am using public transport. And I was stuck in the car, and I was sitting in the car and blocked in the congestion. Normally I'm sitting in the metro. And the metro brings me to the institute, and so it was much more comfortable. And then I was reminded on the first paragraph of Austrian traffic code. And the Austrian traffic code has the definition: what is a road? The road is a public space which can be used by everybody under same conditions. And I recognized, well, I am using this huge amount of space around me if I'm in the car. But when I am walking, I would like to use the same amount of space, and everybody would say that I'm totally crazy. May I show it how it works?
Please, let's see these images. I think we saw one of them a little bit earlier.
It should appear, the first one.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh yeah, this is the normal footprint of normal mobility. This is electric mobility. We are moving with since 6 million years on this kind of electric mobility. This is active electric mobility. Well, if I'm appearing with this frame, everybody thinks I'm mad.
They thought you were crazy.
Yeah, but I think there are some slides behind this one. Oh, this one. If somebody is appearing in this way, this is normal, because the cars in your brain tell me this is totally normal. And then, if I appear in this way, well, this is also normal, but this is crazy. But I'm using only the same space like the people before. And then you see it is a wonderful cabriolet. And I can make a fast walk in the city of Vienna. I have the only problem, I'm stuck in the congestion. And
you look very happy, I have to
this
say.
is, oh yeah, this is, I'm looking happy because, but not the others, because
they're not happy.
they think I'm mad. Because if a normal person looks to this picture, he think, well, this is an idiotic guy. What is he doing with the frame? Because the car in his brain tell him, what is this guy doing on my space? But the real, this is necessary for planners and decision makers. Everything around me is absolutely mad for rational people. Because there are a lot of space occupied by cars. Well, this, I'm looking for a parking place. You see, this is a middle class. This is a normal middle class. This is a baby walking tool. And now I have found a parking place. I can read my newspaper, very convenient. And the society will provide me with a lot of free parking places. Because nothing, we have already this wonderful, and this is the parking situation, which is a problem. This is really the problem we have to solve in the cities. Okay, but this is much more important, because in this so-called walking tool, if this is a car, you have about 100 or 200 horses in the car. And they are connected with you, and you are not anymore touching the ground with your feet. And your brain is not strong enough to understand what is going on, and it changed the value system. And this is the changing of value system. On the top you see what we accept as humans. We are polluted by air pollution, we are polluted by poison gases, we are polluted by dust and everything like that. If an artist would like to make some paintings with artificial products like cars, everybody would defend the dignity of the car. We defend the dignity of the car, but we violate the dignity of humans. And then on the lower part, this is later on additional sketch which was made necessary because a professor from Switzerland said to me, oh, you must make the right opposite position. You must splash the water on the driver when he comes out of the car. And this is totally the difference how the value system of the society has changed.
Heiner, I want to ask you about this because we should really stress here that you were having a conversation about the role of a car in the 1970s when nobody was really talking about transport as a science, you said, and mobility. Heiner, at that time, when you started out in this sector, what were the biggest hurdles then? Was it awareness? Was it getting people to talk?
I would go back to this situation here. The car needs even much more space. In average, for all German cars, every car has 4 parking spaces in average. It's 160 million car parking facility in Germany, which is given to the car. So there is no space for anything else. No trees, no pedestrians, no nothing, because the car needs all the space. And if we look to the efficiency of the seats in the car, 160 million empty car seats are driven every day in average over our street network. Empty car seats. Because it's in average during a working day, it's 1.1 person per car. So that is the reason why we are always stuck in traffic jam. And the second thing is, as Hermann says, the car is in our brain. We call, if you start to plan a pedestrian zone, in Germany, a pedestrian zone is called a traffic-free zone. It's so stupid. There is much more traffic afterwards. There is 10 times more people moving there compared to earlier times. But people are not traffic. Walking is not seen as means of transport. Walking is something if you talk about transport and mobility, all people have cars in mind. And so that is our problem. Coming back to what was discussed this morning, our problem is that there is a lack of fantasy to imagine that a world without cars, or a world with half a number of cars, or even 10% of, I always say 4 million cars would be enough for Germany. With 4 million cars you could have a complete mobile Germany.
But you are very generous. You are very generous.
Yes, I'm generous. Okay.
So that is our problem, that we have always, and the greatest problem is that our politicians tend to say, well, for big cities, maybe a future with less car is imaginable, but rural areas without cars are not imaginable. So that is our problem. Of course, rural areas could be provided with perfect mobility without cars, but we cannot cannot imagine. So at the same time as we see the progress in our digital world, everything is going on and innovation, but in our thinking about mobility, there is no innovation at all.
But
we are stuck in the same problems as ever.
What I said, mental mobility is
Yes,
going
yes.
to zero, physical
But
mobility
you
is...
two had that mental mobility. In the 1970s, you had the fantasy to think about that.
Well, you must activate mental mobility if you have no car.
Absolutely, and you were able to
Absolutely.
do so. So if at that time you had looked into your crystal ball and looked at where we are now in 2020, would you be disappointed by how little has changed, or have we made progress in some areas?
Well, I would like to add something to what Heiner had said just before. The normal situation of human society and human settlements was for about 6 million of years, I would say at least the last 10,000 years, a car-free settlement. When I grew up as a child, well, I'm not more than 100 years old, I grew up in an absolutely car-free environment. And my family, I grew up in a village, and the village existed for more than 800 years on the documents. Maybe it existed for a longer time. So this was a local economy, and mobility was absolutely mentally active. Physically, we needed only solar energy, which means walking, horsepower, wind power, water power, and something like that. This was absolutely sustainable. But in the meantime, the total village was destroyed by the cars.
Okay, let's talk about the cars and how they got to the standing that they have in our society today. They are seen at times as a status symbol, as a democratic way of providing people with mobility to be able to move around the country in areas where trains perhaps don't reach. I mean, how did it get that status in our society?
Because legislation says you have to have a car. Our German legislation says if you build a house, you have to supply cars. If you are a local authority, you have to build street network for cars. Our legislation forces everyone who has decision-making in mobility has to provide cars. That is the highest priority. We saw the figures of Amsterdam this morning. Amsterdam per year invests more money into cycling compared with the whole Republic of Germany. It's unbelievable. No one says you have to invest into cycle infrastructure. Little money is given to this. It's now more than it was 10 years ago, but it's still very, very little. So since we are all forced, you get subsidies for electric cars. You get not subsidies for buying a new ticket, yearly ticket for a railway. So it's politicians want to have a world with many cars.
Well,
not efficient, but please buy the next car. We built now our motorways from 4 lanes to 6 lanes to 8 lanes. We say, Sunday in the church, we say we would like to have a world with less cars. But we still expand the infrastructure for cars everywhere.
So there's a gap between awareness of the fact that, for example, emissions are rising and we need to cut emissions, and action. This is something that Feline Gaffron talked about yesterday, is of this gap between those two. Why is that?
Well, it is because the car is in the brain of the decision makers, first of all. Secondly, Heiner mentioned already a situation in Germany, because one of the sources of the legal source is the Reichsgaragenordnung, the parking order from 1939, where the Führer has
Hitler is meant.
Hitler has.
I understood.
Hitler has released this Reichsgaragenordnung, this parking order, which says that for each apartment, each other human activity, whatever it is, working or shopping and something like that, for the existing and in the future expected number of cars, parking places must be provided on the spot or nearby. And this destroys the cities, because if you are parking on the spot, then you have to build the carriageway to the spot, and then you destroy the whole other parts of mobility.
But we do not have any law saying when you buy a new IKEA estate, you have to supply public transport. Nothing is said like this. Public transport is, well, you may have it or you may not. car is, you are forced to build everything for the car infrastructure, but nothing comparable to public transport.
Or not even for children. No safe environment for children. It's something like that. And Germans, Swiss, I have only the data from Germany, Swiss and Austria. These the families spend about 50% of their income more for cars compared to children.
So you think the change needs to come from regulation, from the government itself, setting the standards and providing the infrastructure for car-free transport. Yes. What is the role of the individual, of our society actually to push for that change?
Well, we have some experience in Vienna. We had in the 1993 period, we had about 40% of trips internal trips of Vienna were on cars and 27 on public transport. Today we have the opposite situation. So this is a real shift of mobility. The background is the work which we have carried out in the 70s, 50 years ago. This was the basis of the decision makers afterwards, because the Viennese people rejected the traditional planning approach at this time to build motorways in the city. In 1972, the government has rejected these motorway programs, and we have some still small remains, but we don't have motorways in the city anymore. Mm-hmm. And this, I think, brought a big change at this time. This was the time where the city, even in Vienna, has removed tram lines to make space for cars, built underground metros to make space for cars on the surface, and something like that. And this could be stopped in 1974. And we started with traffic calming, following the Dutch examples. And since I am producing every year successful students, lady students, then they are going into the administration, they are going into the consultancy work, and they understand what is going on. Because when we are talking about mobility, we think mobility is increasing with cars is totally idiotic. Because if you are sitting in the car, you are totally passive transported.
It's not active mobility.
It's not active mobility. If we count mobility as we usually do it, number of trips per person per day, this is a constant number, has not changed over the whole period of motorization. And there is also this is a problem for economists, because the economists believe that saving time is important. Well, it is important, but not in the transport system. Because if in the transport system travel speed is increased, the travel time don't change. What is happening, the distances are increasing. And if the distances are increasing, the regions and destinations are separated more and more. And this is the reason why we have, as Heiner had said, we have the shopping centers somewhere, but we have no local shops anymore. So we destroy the city centers, and we pave the way for the priority of corporations.
What about this dichotomy that we've heard about, especially yesterday, that some industry players say, well, the reason that we haven't moved forward is the infrastructure isn't there. And others say, well, we haven't moved forward with the infrastructure because the technology isn't there. It's this question, this chicken and egg question. How do you see that, Heiner?
Well, of course, if you look to walking, there is a certain amount of walking which everywhere, even in the United States, even in Los Angeles, there is an amount, about 10% of our mobility is done by walking because of reasons people don't have a car, etc. But if you start really to have a pedestrian-friendly city where you would say all the surrounding, the little child just can go out the door and can play there. If you have situations like this, we have some places in Germany where we have a balance in this mobility. It's the reason why I say the national governments do not solve the problem. National governments are still in the medieval times in mobility politics, but local authorities, if you look to 100 different local authorities, there is a great variety of solutions. Like Freiburg is very different from Frankfurt. Amsterdam is very different from other places. So if you look around, you find that the local authorities, they have fantasy. They really dare to change things, though the legislation still doesn't really support them by doing so. So if you want to have new ideas what to do in terms of infrastructure, look around what the local authorities do. Go to Barcelona, go to Freiburg, go to Münster, wherever, and then you can see that you have still choices to change the surrounding. You have the choice to bring the green back to the city. You have the choice to make the street network more pedestrian friendly and more cycle friendly. The legislation doesn't help you much. So our problem really is we should have sitting here politicians of the parliaments, of all European parliaments, and the European community still is very much in front of the trans-European networks, of the heavy infrastructure, the high-speed infrastructure, while what we need is really local mobility to enable local mobility to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
Well, but this can be only done if you remove the cars.
What is the role of a car in a city, let's say?
Well,
where do cars belong?
Well, the role of the car is the role we provide for them.
What is the role that you would provide?
There's no natural law that the car has to be somewhere on the globe. This is absolutely not the case. There is no evolution which goes to direction. Well, this is only, I would say, a defect in our conscious reflection. This is the problem here, and the role of the car. The main problem why the people are deciding this criminal projects and something like that is because they have no idea how complex systems react. And we have seen this morning a very nice lecture about exponential growth and something like that. But the most fast exponential growth is stupidity.
Stability. Stupidity. Okay, that's different.
Is the unlimited resource of humans.
Okay.
This is absolutely the case. This is resulting from the extrapolation of our evolutionary, very well-founded normal behavior within our frame, which we understand. If I make a mistake and I touch something which is wrong or dangerous, something like that, I have the feedback. But we have removed all the feedbacks because the car has now an eigendynamic to change the structure and to change the culture and to change the cities. And we have addicted people in the governments, we have addicted people at the universities, they produce addicted students, car-addicted students, we have addicted, and they are supported by the government and something like that. Because for research, which really goes to solutions, you don't get the money. You are the enemy, because in the meantime, the industry is controlling the universities.
I would solve some of the problems since Felix Petersen this morning showed us the pictures about the development of our cities. There is much space which could be used for cheaper housing. Take all these parking facilities of IKEA, public parking, and rebuild them with cheap houses. Take all these huge crossings, 20 lanes from left and from right and from there and there. Rebuild it for urban development. We have some examples. There is an example in Ulm, where a big street going through the city, the historical city, has been rebuilt with houses. There is much space. It's all belonging to the public. All this traffic space is belonging to the public. They could easily build cheap houses. They could easily rebuild urban. And that is the reason, since we do not make this, we still have this urban sprawl, which is related very much to the car.
Yes.
Urban sprawl is dependent on the car. So if you want to stop urban sprawl, you really have to do something about less cars.
No, not less cars. You must separate cars from human activities. So if you park the cars outside of the cities, the city is becoming healthy.
Yeah.
Well, this is a very simple calculation. So you have a limited space on public in cities. And I ask you the question, how many wallets can you store in the cars when they are parked there? And how many wallets can you store if you let people walk there? Very simple.
Yeah.
Very simple. 10 to 20 times per minute, more wallets are going along the shops. And from 50 years of experience for fighting for pedestrianizations in many cities, the car owners, they are totally afraid when we take the cars out away from the front of the shops. And I have a lot of empirical data that when we have pedestrianized the city, the turnover is increasing So today, at least the clever car shop owners are happy when they have a pedestrian
When there are car-free
area.
zones.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
We could do this for another few hours, I'm sure. We're unfortunately running out of time, so I'll ask you to put on your vision to the future now, because we heard a little bit earlier in the panel, change does not come overnight. So if you were to look a bit into the future, let's say 30 years from now, what do you expect to see for our future mobility? What do you hope to see?
We Copenhagenize the world. We really get back public space. We get space for children, for walking, for urban life, and we do not block anymore our future with these millions and millions of inefficient cars.
I'm assuming it's a very similar vision for you.
Very simple, very simple. I hope our mental mobility will catch up with our physical mobility. With the internet. This is another danger.
Even with the internet. That's a good point to close on. As I said, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you both, Hermann Knoflacher and Heiner Monheim. It's been a pleasure to talk in this Gatezeug here and hear your insights on the past, present, and future. Thank you.
Thank you.